So we're here with Stefan Cvijetan. I said it okay?
Sure.
Did I?
Close enough, yeah.
How do you say it?
Cvijetan is good. That's how
Okay.
it is from now on. Yeah.
No. Come on, man.
Cvijetan.
Okay, Cvijetan.
Sure.
No, I messed up the second A. I did. Anyways, Stefan is an osteopathic colleague, so we're here for an edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast, and primarily what we're going to talk about is networking, because you actually happen to be a president.
Unfortunately.
President of?
Of a networking chapter here in Oakville.
Yeah.
It's called BNI.
So Business Networking International, and it is the Oakville chapter, or is it like Oakville West, Oakville?
It is one of the Oakville chapters.
Okay.
We're focused more in kind of Lakeshore, Lenape area of Oakville.
Okay.
But we actually branch out to neighboring cities as well.
Okay.
So we have a pretty diverse group.
Well, also just based on the way the geography is, there's reasonable physical connections as far as transportation and what that's concerned, where it would be reasonable if maybe somebody had a unique service from Burlington that was not in this region, in Glen Abbey, as you said. So
Yeah.
sometimes there's value there, but BNI, if I'm not mistaken, one of the things that you do is you do attempt to work within a given region, right? And not necessarily ideally, but sometimes there's a service that's just not there that would benefit the people, all of the people there.
Yeah.
So the population as well as the businesses, right? Okay. Now, what I wanted to talk about is networking. Mm-hmm. So I was one of your instructors for the early portion of your osteopathic education, and I stepped away from teaching. And then when we stayed in contact, which is quite enjoyable because you really like to mess with me.
Enjoyably so, yeah. I get away with it most of the time.
Yeah, like it doesn't really work, but
You can be modest.
you keep doing it. But the thing that I think is consistent across the board is the message going into osteopathic school was that you would predict a large income when you graduated. Did you get that message?
Yes.
Have you noticed that advertising claim shift over time? Have you seen the change?
Yeah.
So it used to be all of the grads will make this much money. Then it was 90% of our grads make this much money upon graduation. Now it's some of our grads make the same dollar figure. So there's a shift. Now, one of the things that I would say is that a lot of that shift probably has to do with early on in the way that osteopathy is developed in Canada. Most people had previous healthcare practices running, right? Because it's modified attendance. You took modified attendance, so you can still have a fairly solid work life, but it's modified attendance, and it was likely set up that way because people already had practices running, so they couldn't miss a huge amount of time. So if you have a previous practice running, you already have a business running, which means you have a network, you have, you could use the term clients, customers, patients, whatever term. Whereas those who didn't have that and don't have that network are likely going to have a really rough time to start.
Yeah.
Now, that's relatively true of myself. I have been lucky in that I have been able to have relationships with others who had previous businesses, and I could work with them and I could benefit from their network. And the reason for that is when I started, my daughter was just born, and I purposely took a lot of responsibility, so my schedule was kind of weird, and I couldn't be out networking, but I knew its value. Now, all of this is a preamble to saying that when you got out, we were talking and just talking about practice, and I said, no, network. Network is the gigantic thing. If you know people, then you have a way, depending on your personal style, without feeling greasy, to then build a practice just through even relatively organic referrals. Now, that said, you took that upon yourself and you went networking.
Yeah.
So how'd you do it? Well, okay, maybe too broad. How'd you start?
Well, it's like you said, when I came out of school, much like some other fellows and colleagues, right, we didn't have a prior background that we can kind of siphon off of. Mm-hmm. And so what happens with a lot of graduates, I think you know primarily as well, they kind of become dependent on entering into somebody else's network. So maybe they're entering into another clinic or another practice in the hope that there's some runoff into their business.
Now, I did that.
Yeah, and it works.
Well,
to a degree.
But there's also likely a perspective that I have that I don't expect them to feed me
No.
Right?
You're
And-
just looking to kind of help engage into the network.
Yeah, yeah.
But some people expect to.
Yeah, well, it's like if
unfortunately.
if the clinic owner doesn't get you busy, then the clinic owner is screwing up and you hate their guts and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
So, after that chat I had with you, and I had a lot of brains picking at me at the time, it's unique to see from there, just starting off, especially because I moved my practice to an area with, I would say, fair competition
Yep.
compared to other cities, and I was the new kid on the block.
Yep.
So I tried networking, and it's not to confuse networking with marketing.
Sure.
I think a lot of people think marketing and advertising is networking. No.
Yeah.
I also wanted a more organic approach.
Yep.
I didn't want to solicit people.
Yeah.
I didn't want to make false claims, which
Yep.
happens a lot in healthcare.
Yes.
Very often. So
Just a small point. I don't know that the people making the claims know that the claims are false.
I don't think they know.
Yeah, so they are working with the specific pieces of information they have. They think that lifting the clavicle off of somebody's left thoracic region is going to specifically free up the lymphatic duct, the thoracic duct.
Yeah, or change the axis of an organ.
Yeah.
So I had to be mindful of that too, because networking means I'm not trying to impress, let's say, yourself
Yeah.
or other professors or other osteopaths, other health
Sure.
practitioners. It's getting people into the door
Yeah.
to see what I do. So I took a very education-mattered approach to it.
Yep.
So that's how I initially found a networking chapter. Now, BNI is one type. There are other
Yep.
types of networking groups around. But I saw it as an opportunity of, okay, here's a group of like-minded professionals. And the one that I am now president of, oddly enough, they're just open to learning what I do.
Okay.
So that
Yep.
became kind of the first step in, is I'm just going to teach individuals what my business is.
Yeah.
Now, naturally, over time, you do this on a weekly basis, your network grows pretty quickly,
Yes.
because then people find your services more valuable or more likely to step into your door without the need of marketing or advertising.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I would say is the manner in which humans work. So I like to attempt to figure out what's consistent and stable, not necessarily what's the new hotness.
Yeah.
Right? So if you consider that there was definitely a time where businesses were highly functional, highly profitable, and there was no electricity, right? So you're like, okay, well, there has to be a feature that is still present across time, across eras, across epochs. So if people consider social media as the way to network and the way to market, then realistically the features that would still have a good outcome would be the same features as in person. It's just you require electricity.
Yeah.
And above that you require the internet for connectedness. But the actual type of interaction is stable. It tends to be much more interpersonal, right? So if your personalities don't jive, well, the network in that way won't grow. But what you've learned is maybe not necessarily where your network will grow, but where your network won't grow. And instead of maybe taking that as rejection, it's like, okay.
Well, no, and you're right to say that, and I'll get into social media in a second too, because I tried to be active on social media,
Yeah.
and so we've run episodes on prior podcasts as well and such. But what I learned with, I suppose, networking is it's more of a consistent approach within certain confines that you can't control. So I did a lot of social media before,
Yeah.
but of course you can't quite control where that media goes.
Sure.
And then I had a quick realization, I wasn't so much networking as just trying to obtain visibility.
Yes.
And there is a difference there.
Yep.
So why I joined a networking group again is it was actually a colleague of mine, another one who's a patient now, who surmised to me that certain networking groups, because there was a need with it over the course of the pandemic as well,
Yep.
some professions just lost credibility and they needed to rehabilitate that.
Yeah.
Visibility is one thing, but it doesn't necessarily turn anything into lead or generate something into business.
Yep.
And that's a mistake a lot of people make. So we can use a chamber of commerce as an example. This is most, especially in healthcare, the first approach into a community is I'm going to attend chamber of commerce meetings. Then I found out networking groups essentially, let's say a networking group of 30 people generates 3 times the referred business than a chamber of commerce with 200% more members.
Yep. So you were, as a basic formula of return on investment,
Yeah.
the networking group, because it's maybe more targeted and smaller,
Yeah.
the relationships are predictably better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's a more consistent format to where we meet.
Mhm.
And again,
And why?
and there's an educative approach. So it's not
Yeah.
me trying to solicit you with something.
Mhm.
Just say, this is what I do.
Mhm.
This is what I'm looking for.
Yep.
And as those relationships build over time,
Mhm.
yeah, you do actually see an upkick in revenue,
Hmm.
right? So the next step in networking we had to take, and this is another shift I had to make. You know, some people say cast a wide net.
Yep.
Other people say no, have a harpoon.
Yep.
Target a specific audience. I started to swim with the fishes.
Okay.
So much rather than trying to per se target any particular group or
Mhm.
advertise to a
Yeah, yeah,
particular
yeah.
group, I just started hanging out with the groups.
Yep.
This happened primarily 10 months ago when I had my daughter
Hmm.
and my wife went on maternity leave, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden I said, okay, now I really have to kick things into gear.
Yeah.
So I actually started taking myself and my networks that already existed at this
Mhm.
point, and we started doing fundraisers. We started
Yeah.
doing volunteer work.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
started becoming more local to the community.
Yeah.
Because again, in the healthcare practice, and this was the mistake I made with social media, I can't control where social media goes.
Sure.
You can have someone across the world watching your content. It
Yeah.
doesn't generate into anything.
No.
But I can focus within the physical area around me.
Unless you happen to have a business that is context independent.
Yeah.
So you're context dependent based on geography, right? If somebody can't get to you, you can't treat them.
Yeah.
Right? Versus, say, an online business where it's selling a product, either an educational product or a physical product that can go anywhere. Right? So I think that's a useful distinction, because it's not to say that the social media marketing and the context independence can't be useful, but when your business is context dependent.
For what you and I do.
Yes.
Again.
Yeah.
And I personally don't do virtual treatments.
No,
So
fair enough.
some people do.
Well, they'll make the claim in the attempt, which is,
Yeah.
that is what it is. Yep.
But that was kind of the biggest change in philosophy I had to have with
Mhm.
networking.
Sure.
Is just stay local and stay
Mhm.
community driven.
Yep.
And
Well,
so again,
you engage with the community more.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that seems to work well for me at least.
Mhm.
I'm in a very comfortable spot now.
Which is fantastic. What I generally will say, so this, little bit of a, say, explanation before I kind of get to the point. When I got my master's, I did not understand that my thesis supervisor is a cognitive psychologist by training. I just, okay, she's awesome. Thesis supervisor, woohoo! I didn't know. And it's health science education,
Yeah.
right? Now, I ended up accidentally learning about cognitive psychology quite a bit without knowing that I did.
Osmosis.
No, well, it sort of, I mean, you could make that claim as a reasonable descriptor. It might not be perfect, but I get it. The thing is that I didn't know the differences between different branches of psychology. I had no idea that there were any. It took a long time for me to figure that out. And what I came to was, who knew? Thinking or considering education and learning involves thinking about thinking.
Hmm.
So, oh, who knew? Versus, say, behavioral psychology. Because for myself, behavioral psychology is a bit of a pet peeve. Because if fundamentally behavioral psychology makes the claim that thinking doesn't matter, they don't attempt to attend to it. Right? I'm like, well, I don't get that. Behavioral psychology, you tend to find more in circumstances where you're trying to get an outcome, such as advertising or governments trying to implement a policy and get people to behave a particular way, laws, stuff like that. Behavioral psychology seems to be more sexy there. And I'm not a fan. It has great strengths. I'm not a fan. So, that said, if you look at behavioral psychology, and you look at it honestly, what you'll note is there's variation in behaviors between individuals. You can predict a group sort of, but they're made up of a bunch of weird individuals, and then you kind of get the normative thing in the group. So with the concept of attempting to be visible, to generate a behavior, now the behavior would be a purchasing behavior, you could say. You would require that most would try to sell you on the idea that if you say a specific thing, the behavior will show up. So then you, as the purchaser of that piece of knowledge that should drive the behavior, are really excited. You've seen conversion rates on advertising campaigns. They're disgustingly low. But if your net is large enough or your visibility is large enough, then that disgustingly low conversion rate actually ends up being monetarily useful.
Yes.
Right? If you need 10 people, and your conversion rate is 1%, right? you need to be seen by, 1,000 people.
So this is something that you might find interesting. I'll speak onto the conversion rates, because that's something I had to learn as well.
Yeah.
That was my attempt. But then that became the long game. It's just I have to get more visibility to a larger group.
Yeah.
So essentially people who spend, I don't spend anything on ad spend or anything
Yeah.
like that, but people who do, you essentially want how many potential views can I get?
Yes,
As said,
you pay for
conversion-
views, yeah.
The conversion rate is so low that, okay, instead of 5,000 clicks, I need 10,000,
Yeah.
12,000.
Yeah.
What I've learned, it seems to be working for me, so I can only speak of it from
Yep.
personal context, but what's more valuable is touch points.
Sure.
So I've also learned in terms of business, you seeing one advertisement once may not turn into anything.
Yep.
The average consumer tends to convert after 12 touch points.
Okay.
And this number seems to be raising. So
Okay.
this seems, people,
It's getting harder.
it's getting harder.
Okay.
They need to witness you more often
Yeah.
before they convert into
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So this is where I kind of focus on networking.
Yeah.
So in my networks, outside of the group or not, because I'm part of a lot of organizations
Sure.
now within Oakville, I'm happy
Yeah.
to say, but I have to meet with them constantly,
Yes.
because now we can lower the conversion rate,
Mhm.
but the frequency of the relationship has to increase.
Yeah.
So that's where now social media can come into play.
Sure.
So if I go to a meeting, you've seen me present actually.
Yep.
If I do a presentation on osteopathy, that's one touch point.
Mhm.
Then I redirect, let's say, potential patients with some literature.
Mhm.
That's a second touch point.
Sure.
Maybe they visit my website. That's
Yeah.
a third touch point.
Yeah.
They find my podcast. They
Mhm.
find my YouTube.
Mhm.
These are all just supplementary avenues for them to get to know me better.
Yeah.
And once they've witnessed me enough,
Yeah.
then for whatever reason it seems to work, it converts to,
Yeah.
what? Of all the practitioners in this area,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to Stefan.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I also just want to bring in is that you can't convert a non-buyer into a buyer.
No.
Right? But those people who might consider it, if they know that you exist, they can consider you. So those touch points are something where you can have predictive power. If you have more frequent interaction with people one way or another, then they can consider you if they're a possible buyer.
Yeah.
Right? What I would say is that osteopathy as a profession, at least within the Canadian context, is still a relative unknown. So yeah, those people who are finding a way to have more touch points as a reasonable descriptor are probably going to feel like they're having more success, right? And they may feel that because of what walks in the door, but they may be missing that what's really happening is just they're the only ones that are visible. The quality of their product can be discussed.
It's true.
Right? So sometimes what you'll see is people with a high quality product that aren't necessarily visible consistently in some way, shape, or form are going to have a harder time being busy in the same way that somebody who's just visible. Right? Now, I still think that interpersonal relationship, as you know, your networks, the consistent, frequent interaction, it's just another way that they know you, they trust you, and they don't even have to be talking about the profession. My guess is you don't necessarily talk about osteopathy a ton in these circumstances.
No, I mean,
Yeah, you're you.
yeah.
You're present, you're engaged. These people are present and engaged with you, and then now they know kind of what you do, so when they see a possibility, they'll say, yeah, call him.
Well, and that's the point. The point of building a relationship is to bring them in to see the outcome.
Mhm.
And I'm quite friendly with all my patients. I always
Yep.
say, feel free to judge me when you walk out.
Yeah.
That's the honest. That's just my
Yeah, yeah.
personality. Just
Yep.
I'm not the best. I'm not going to make that claim.
Mhm.
But generally, now that they've gone to know me more interpersonally,
Mhm.
they've accessed me through multiple touch points. They receive, for whatever reason it happens to be, the outcome they're looking for.
Mhm.
Now it's developed my credibility within my networks.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so now it starts to grow organically.
Yep.
Again, without the need of soliciting,
Yeah.
marketing,
Yeah.
jumping around in a toupee.
Yeah. Is it toupee?
Toupee.
A wig?
Yeah.
For who?
I'll show you some stuff after.
Okay. Like,
There's a
Stefan,
lot of wig wearers out there. I'm just...
you don't need a
No,
wig.
I'm good at it.
Okay.
I think that's a big set of hair.
Yeah. Good. Okay, as long as you know. Anyways, I had something in my head. Way to go, man. Son of a bitch.
To the guy who said I don't get him. Yeah. At the beginning of the
Oh.
recording.
Oh.
I tried to mess with you and it doesn't work.
Well, not often. I said it doesn't often work.
Sure.
You,
Proof's in the pudding.
you do sometimes, absolutely.
Have you recalled what you were trying to say?
No, because you're consistently distracting me, so way to go, you bastard. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Anyways, so I think the primary points are having real interpersonal connection has great value, and you found it to have great value. Having consistent interpersonal connection has great value, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about you convincing somebody that they should see you. You're just being present and engaged such that when it's a reasonable opportunity, it works. Now, in relation to that, depending on the personality of the individual, some people are really good at being hard pressing salespeople. Some people are very good at that. I am not. Internally, I can't stand the feeling of convincing somebody to hang out with me in any way. I hate it. Which is why if I were to engage in your common sales tactics, I'd just feel gross. I'd have a hard time falling asleep at night. Whereas if I have good connections with people, I just show them what I do, the work speaks for itself, my personality speaks for itself, because I call my personality a good triage mechanism. Some people are willing to stick around, some people aren't, because I'm not going to tell you that particular things are happening and tell you why you have to come back and see me. I'm going to tell you, hey, I don't think that's happening. I know this isn't moving. If it relates well to what you're complaining about, cool, right? They'll change together. So the networking approach that you've taken, because it also sounds like you're not all that interested in convincing people to hang out with you. You're much more interested in having a good relationship.
I've had crummy sales jobs in the past.
Yep.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's not for me. So for me, it really is kind of in lieu to everything you just said. It's more just, hey, this is who I am, this is what I offer. If we're a fit, great.
Yeah. Now, that said, if that's your personality, you might actually benefit greatly from a predetermined framework, such as a networking group. Because when you're willing to show up to that, you still just get to be you, and you have some constraints put on you that suggest that you should behave in a particular way that would help the network, right? As opposed to you trying to generate it de novo or from scratch and saying, I guess I'll just go meet people. Well, if you're not good at meeting people, you've got a problem. If you walk into something that already is running, then you deal with all of these, say, stumbling blocks, right? So overall, you'd say that entering a networking group hit all the needs that you had.
If you're willing to participate within the networking group. So this is kind of something odd I've noticed, especially now that I've taken on presidency of the group. You definitely have people who are more willing to give and those who are more willing to receive.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's my nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
And the later half always seem to fail in the networking.
Sure.
Because they do have more of that sales mind instead of kind of interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
So they don't tend to last. And there's usually a trend where they might succeed more with marketing, with advertising, with, I'm going to say, polite soliciting.
Fair enough.
Because they're not ready to now engage with the network themselves. They're just looking to make a sale, essentially.
Well, I'm just going to check the time on this thing. There we go. I can see that. Sorry. Please excuse my funny looks. I'm just trying to see where the camera's at. Anyways, the other thing is that that approach, that interpersonal relationship approach, that network-based approach, ends up having a value, and that in any given transaction, if you try to optimize your outcome in the transaction, you screw somebody.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's $100, I'm taking 99, I'm giving you $1, I win. I win big, right? Whereas if you know that you have to have another transaction, if you screw somebody, the next transaction is far less likely unless you're the only one that offers that thing. And even then, people will eventually just say, somebody will just become your competition because they're pissed at you. Whereas if you share and you're reciprocal, then what ends up happening is that relationship can last longer because neither one of you feels like you're taking advantage of the other or being taken advantage of or screwing each other. What you end up having is a relationship that is built on trust and reciprocation, right? So the way that I'll put it within, say, the actual delivery of care for money, right, is that if you are looking to win on each transaction, you'll see a high price. And then you'll try to describe it in whatever way you'd like to rationalize. Whereas you might see a more reasonable price if it's dollars per relationship as opposed to dollars per transaction. What I would say is that BNI is probably $1 per relationship organization. Is that
That's how
fair?
it should be.
Yeah.
That's how it should be. There's definitely certain groups
Mhm.
that are more per transaction.
Yeah.
But you have to filter those out as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Fair enough. Yeah. So overall, again, just to kind of reiterate and bring it back, interpersonal relationships have high value. Interpersonal relationships that are not transactional necessarily in their nature, but they're more, or maybe not dollars per transaction, but dollars per relationship, probably are greater across time.
Yeah.
It might not be a quick build, but it'll be a stable.
It's definitely a longer term approach.
Yeah.
But from my own experience and that what I've had to look into,
Mhm.
it's more sustainable as
Yeah.
well.
Right now. And then, more or less, if your if your personality is not a high pressure sales personality, getting into a networking group is probably going to have high value because it's not necessarily in your nature to do it. Whereas if you're willing to participate in that networking group, a lot of that's taken care of. So your personality is nurtured and allowed to be what it is instead of being forced to be something that it is not.
Yeah, and I think in healthcare that's important. Now it depends on the field. Some
Mhm.
fields require more of that kind of A-type sales personality,
Mhm.
but in healthcare I think you want to come across as genuine.
I think you should be genuine.
Typically
If you
speaking.
want to come across as genuine, then you might be slimy.
You used the term greasy earlier. And
Yeah.
just, I can see that with maybe, let's just say a realtor or a
Sure.
salesperson, that
Mhm.
might seem a little more common.
Yep.
But not everyone might build that trust.
Sure.
You know, you might not go to that person a second time.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
in healthcare, it's just you have to be yourself. You have to be genuine.
Yeah.
Because you want it to be a long-term network.
Yep. Awesome. So I think that covers most of the stuff that is going to be value to a lot of people. So I will say thank you very much, El Presidente.
Thank you. Don't call me that, but thank you.
Okay. I don't know many other languages.
You're fine.
All right, Captain.
No, but thanks, because you helped me out when I first
Yeah.
graduated as well.
Wow.
It was an interesting time, so I needed to lean
Yeah.
on other practitioners because I didn't want to be too reliant on any one group.
Yeah.
That was a mistake I made in the past.
Sure. Well, I'm always happy to help, and I appreciate the reciprocal relationship.
Awesome. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna do
No,
that.
come on, man.
No.
All right.
Not today.
Bye.